Hello, everyone. Welcome to this online presentation in which I will share with you some key insights from scientific research on the topic of persuasive health communication. Now, this will be a very practical presentation. And in this presentation, I will really try to provide you some concrete results and some concrete advice that you can directly apply if you want to design persuasive health campaigns yourself. But what I will also do is I will also refer to the sources on my slides. So if you want to go deep and to learn more, you can, of course, read the full studies yourself. So just a quick introduction. My name is Simone Krauer, and I am currently working as a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Antwerp in Belgium. And I also have been involved in both marketing research and health communication research projects. Now, to begin, I must say that not just for health communication professionals, but also for researchers who study persuasive health communication, the media landscape has become quite interesting and maybe also a little bit more complicated and more challenging. Because well, these good old times where we only had television, print, and radio as the main mass media channels, well, these times are of course far behind us. And well, the internet has completely changed our media consumption and also our information seeking behavior. It has, for instance, changed the ways in which we obtain health information, but also the ways in which we communicate about health. And it has brought some challenges for the healthcare system, as you may have all faced yourself, such as the ease at which misinformation spreads, the fact that the media landscape is quite fragmented, and well, the rise of filter bubbles where we can get into due to the social media algorithms. Now, when looking at all these developments and adapting our communication strategy to it, I think that there is one key thing to remember when we are creating these persuasive health messages. And that is that there is one thing that hasn't really changed that much. And that is the fact that we are, of course, still humans. We are still humans with our human way of thinking and our human biases. And well, what the internet has done is that it has provided many new ways to communicate and to influence our human way of thinking and behavior, both in good and bad ways. But well, our human brains and we in our core are still largely the same. So, with that in mind, I want to center this presentation around a psychological mechanism that has basically always been around. But well, that is these days still very important to think about if you are designing your persuasive health campaign. And this mechanism is so called reactance. Now, reactance basically occurs when we people feel that our freedom to do or to think whatever we want is being threatened. So, for instance, when someone tries to persuade us to think or to do something. Now, we humans, we simply don't like that. We like to maintain our freedom, or at least the feeling that we are free to really do whatever we want. And what we often do is we try to resist this influence. So, for instance, I really enjoy drinking a nice beer, and if anyone tries to persuade me and says that drinking beer is not good for my health, I will respond defensively because I feel threatened to think and to do whatever I want with regards to beer. Now, we often then try to resist this influence, and there are many ways to resist this influence. For instance, I can try to avoid a message. But I can also use counter arguments, or I try to strengthen my current way of thinking. And this often occurs even though someone presents me some convincing facts. Now, one of the challenges these days, where most of us are, of course, using internet on a daily basis, is that avoiding a message, but also counter arguing, has in some ways become easier. For instance, if I want to avoid online advertisements, I just install an online advertising blocker. And if I want to counter argue that beer is actually healthy, it will be very easy for me to find a website that stresses all the health benefits of beer. And I'm also, quite sure that there's probably somewhere even a Facebook group that supports a beer based diet. So the question is, how can we design our health message in such a way that this reactance and these defensive responses are less likely to occur? And how can we make sure that people actually become more open towards our messages so we can also reach them online? Now, in this presentation, I will share 3 best practices with you that may help you to decrease this reactance, and that can also make your health communication campaign more persuasive. And these 3 practices are first, educate, don't persuade. Second, make use of narratives or so called storytelling. And third, try to make use of peers and influencers on social media that are similar to your target audience. All right, let's start with the first best practice, and that is educate, not persuade. Now, what do I mean with this? Well, often when we design campaigns, we use quite explicit advertisements. And these advertisements often really tell people what to think or do. We force people, for instance, to view a banner ad with a persuasive message, or we force them to watch a commercial before a YouTube video that tells them why they should think or do something. Now, this often doesn't work because I've just explained that when you really try to push people or force them into something, they often become resistant. However, what we have found is that different reactions occur when people are not forced to view a persuasive message, but instead they really decide themselves to consume certain information or certain content. Um, so, what do I mean with this? Well, you can, of course, also try to package your persuasive message into more informative or entertaining content that really fulfills people's needs. And some examples are, for instance, that you create an interesting video that explains something, or that you write interesting blog posts. And when people decide to consume this media content themselves, they are often, they become less critical to it because they are not feeling they are pushed into reading it. No, they are deciding it themselves. They are educating themselves. And this subsequently leads to less defensive responses. So, one example of a campaign that really tries to educate instead of persuade is, for instance, a series of sponsored news articles from the Dutch Diabetes Foundation. So, one of the goals of this foundation is to lower the sugar consumption in the Netherlands. But what they do is they are not telling people, like, okay, this sugar is super bad. You really shouldn't do it, and create a lot of fear abuse. No, what they do in this campaign is they really they try to provide interesting articles, but they're also creating fun challenges um, that really help people to live more healthy, but more in a fun and entertaining and interesting way. Now, with these sponsored news articles, it is, for instance, the case that people are really deciding themselves to click on an article and to read it. And because it goes in this way, instead of that they are being forced, it is more likely that they will become more open towards that article. Now, of course, when you design these persuasive campaigns in the form of content, media content, such as uh, entertaining articles or videos, it is important that the content itself, the message itself, also doesn't evoke reactance. There are different studies that have studied how to do that, and they have found quite some interesting ways to design your content in such a way that people will not feel this reactance. So one way to create content that doesn't make people feel pushed is try to provide more two-sided information. So what you can do is to actually mention and also refute yourself potential counter arguments that people might come up with. Um, so, for instance, in one experiment, I've tested two sponsored articles that promoted using stevia as a sugar alternative. And one article talked only about the benefits of stevia, whereas the other one also mentioned potential concerns and disadvantages of stevia. Now, when we provided the two sided article, people felt much less manipulated and they subsequently were more open towards the message. They considered it to be more credible and persuasive. So, providing two-sided information can actually make your message more persuasive. Now, one important side note is that when you do this, it is important to do not only provide all the counter arguments, but to also refute them, of course, if they are not true. And it is also important that the positive information still outweighs the negative information. Then a second thing that you can do is basically acknowledging to people at the beginning of the message that they might feel attacked or that they might feel resistance against the message. So, for instance, one study that tested messages to influence students' drinking behavior found that the message actually worked better when students were warned beforehand that the message might make them feel threatened or might evoke feelings of irritation. So the message said something like, we will share the latest insights on how drinking alcohol affects your health. Well, this might make you feel threatened in your freedom to drink whatever you want, however, yada, yada, yada. And by acknowledging these feelings up front, the reactance among students actually decreased. And this made the message more persuasive and in the end also resulted into lower intentions to consume alcohol. Then a third thing that you can do to decrease people's reactance when they are reading or viewing your media content is to remind them of their freedom to choose. So, for instance, in one experiment, researchers tested several messages to promote exercising. Now, one type of message really stressed the importance of exercising with all the arguments, and it ended with the notion that therefore you should really, really, really exercise to stay healthy. What the other message did was it provided the same information, but with the difference that this message did not conclude with the notion that people really should exercise, but instead it ended with a message that stressed that people are actually still free to decide whatever they want to do. So this was just some information, and it is up to them to make the decision what feels good to them. Now, by doing this, so by not pushing people, but really, tell them, you know what, you are in charge, you make the decisions. People felt actually less threatened in their freedom, and they were subsequently also less resistant against the message. So basically, the message that was less pushy, less persuasive, actually became more persuasive. So, in sum, what these studies show is that educating instead of pushing and explicitly persuading works much better because people don't have the idea that they are strongly being pushed into a certain direction. And I've provided some ways to do that. One way was to really design your message as normal media content. Um, the second one is to try to provide balanced two-sided information. Furthermore, it is good to actually mention upfront to people that they might feel resistance against the message because this actually takes away some of the resistance. And last but not least, it is good to end the message with reminding people that they are still completely free to make their own decisions. And this again makes people actually less defensive and more open towards your message. All right. Then I want to provide some special attention to what we in the scientific field call narrative persuasion. And narrative persuasion is basically using stories to change people's attitudes and behavior. Now, a lot of research has shown that narrative persuasion often works better than simply presenting facts to people. And there are basically two main reasons why these stories often work better than simply providing facts. First of all, facts are often difficult to understand, and it's also more difficult to identify with them. Um, Take, for instance, this statistics about statistic about meat consumption. Um, it says something about 35 grams of red meat. If you take that daily, it increases the risk of cancer by 18%. And then you think, okay, but what does this actually tell me? Is this also for me? Is this for everyone? What should I do with this information? Can I never eat meat again? Or can I eat it still 3 times a week? So it doesn't really, I don't feel a lot when I read this information. Second, when people are reading these facts, they often are also process it more logically. So it is really a logical message. And a problem with this logical processing is that it often also makes people more critical and again more defensive against your message. On the other hand, when people read or watch a story and they really get transported into it, they are much less likely to become resistant. So, integrating your persuasive message into a story, for instance, about how someone made a health transformation, this will make people much more open towards your message. Now, studies have found that when you create these stories, it is, of course, important that you really think and act like a storyteller and really try to evoke emotion among your audience and to really make sure that they are fully immersed into it. Furthermore, another important thing is that it is better to focus the story on how a person made a positive change instead of focusing the story on how bad behavior resulted into a negative outcome. these fear appeals often don't work. They make again people very defensive. So, for instance, with smoking, it is much better to tell the story about how someone successfully quitted smoking instead of trying to scare people by telling them how smoking resulted into terminal lung cancer, for instance. All right, and then to finish things, I want to share with you some insights on the power of influencers and peers. Now, when we look at the so-called social learning theory, um, well, this theory basically shows that many of our preferences and behaviors are partially being formed by observing and imitating others. Yeah, we humans, we are very social creatures, and we often copy other people. Now, what we know from research is that we often copy mainly the behavior of people who are really like us and who we can or who we want to identify with. And that is why peer education is often used for persuasive health communication. Now, a great thing is that the rise of social media platforms has provided us basically an infinite amount of peers that we can follow and that we connect to online. And well, they've also led to the rise of so called influencers, which are the role models who tend to have a larger number of followers. Now, what the studies have shown is that using either this peer to peer communication online or using influencers can be a very efficient way to influence people's attitudes and behavior. And that is because people are more likely to learn from and to copy um, pe- attitudes and behavior of people who are really like them. Furthermore, well, traditionally we already used a lot of celebrities, but might be the case that influencers, especially more the smaller influencers, may be also perceived as more credible compared to these big celebrities, because it is often easier for the followers to relate to the influencers compared to these super rich and famous people. Now, if you indeed decide to make use of influencers to distribute your message, you should definitely not just look at the number of followers. There are several studies that have shown other selection criteria that are much more important if you want to design an effective campaign with influencers. First of all, the credibility of the influencer is important. And this credibility depends on the trustworthiness and the expertise of the influencer. So it is therefore important to pick an influencer who knows where he or she is talking about. Second, the attractiveness and similarity are important. So if you have, for instance, several target audiences, like for instance moms and younger girls and boys, really make sure that you use for each audience a unique influencer, so people can indeed really identify with them. So, for instance, if you want to motivate moms to stay active, try to use other or yeah, mom influencers who can really lead by example. And last but not least, it is very important that there is a really good match between the influencer and the endorsement. So you have, of course, those influencers who are really endorsing everything. So one day they endorse the McDonald's, the next day they endorse weight loss shakes. And of course, you really don't want to use these influencers for a campaign about body positivity or something. Because, well, the followers will probably not consider this message to be credible. Now, I just want to show you one example of a great campaign that uses peers, so peer-to-peer communication online. And that is this campaign from Mind. And Mind is a British non-profit organization that focuses on mental health problems. Now, what Mind did was it launched a campaign on TikTok, and TikTok is a popular social platform among adolescents. And in this campaign, they really encouraged people to to talk more about the mental health issues that they are facing, and they can do that through short music and dance videos, like people are used to on TikTok. And this campaign was a great success. Many people shared their experiences, and they also shared strategies to cope with mental health issues. And I think that this campaign is just a great way that shows how peers can learn from each other online after they've been encouraged by an organization. All right, so to sum things up, in this video, you've learned that persuasive messages, they often evoke reactance, and also that the internet has made it easier to either avoid or counter argue subsequently the persuasive message. However, I've also shown you a number of things you can do to decrease this defensiveness, and also to increase the chances that people will open up towards your persuasive health message. So, a first thing you can do to minimize reactance is really provide people the feeling that they are educating themselves rather than that they feel that they are being pushed into a certain direction. Now, you can do this so called education by integrating your persuasive message into media content. So, for instance, you can use sponsored news articles, or you can create an entertaining video that really feels like media content and not like an advertisement. And furthermore, you can try to present people more two-sided, balanced information. And it is good to remind people that they are still free to choose, so they don't feel again threatened in their freedom to do whatever they want. Second, another important thing is or a helpful technique basically, is to tell more engaging stories with people that your target audience can identify with. Now, a great thing about the online environment is that targeting opportunities, they are everywhere. So it is really easy to create different stories and to target them to different audiences and to really speak to them. And last but not least, it is a good idea to make use of peers or influencers that are really similar to your target audience. And that is because we are more likely to listen to and also to copy the people that we can identify with. All right. I hope this was of use for you. Now, if you have any questions or thoughts yourself, please share them with me either in a comment, or you can also send me an email. And thanks very much for now.